Today we're dealing with the women in Michigan history, is that right? Did I say it right? Okay. And we have Riley Hubbard with us, so I'll give it to her now.
Hi. So I'm going to try to not necessarily talk too loud with a microphone because I do project pretty well. But yes, I am Riley Hubbard. I am our lead guest assistant at Michigan Women Forward HERStory. Has anybody ever heard of us? Okay. Has anybody ever heard of the Michigan Women's Historical Center and Hall of Fame? Couple more hands. That's us. Just, I know it's a little confusing. Last year, on March 1st, we officially merged with what was the Michigan Women's Foundation, and we all got a new name together. So you can always come visit HERStory. We just recently moved. This is our second move in 3 years. And we are now right downtown Lansing at 105 West Allegan Street. It is the corner of Allegan and Washington. If you will know it by the Grand Traverse Pie building on the corner. We are the same building as them. We are there Monday through Friday, noon to 5. You can always call us and we can try to work something out, especially if you are a bigger group. We are more than willing to try to work out a different time if need be. This is our wonderful new space. It's a little bit smaller than before, but it feels a little bit more open for me. I don't know why. Some nice bright colors. As I said, that we did merge with the Michigan Women's Foundation last year. And so together we have now become Michigan Women Forward. And we have different branches. Us specifically is HERStory. And we look at the accomplishments of Michigan women that have helped propel women forward. So the vision of Michigan Women Forward is a Michigan where women are recognized as leaders who thrive and contribute to uplifting the state's future. And our mission is to accelerate Michigan's progress by advancing equality and opportunity for women and girls. And we do this not only through HERStory, but also through our You Go Girls, which is our camps for middle school, high school, college students, and our Behind Every Woman, which is helping fight injustice. We are one of the leading fundraisers for the Enough Said campaign in Detroit. So that is the rape kit testing, the progress that has been happening in Detroit. And then we also have our, what is that one? Woman Up, which is our entrepreneur branch as well. But we also still do encompass the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame. This here is this is 2017's class. It was a different class for us because it was the first time that we actually put a woman that wasn't a real person necessarily into the Hall of Fame, and that was Rosie the Riveter. So we inducted Rosie as a tribute to all of the Rosies. So all of the women that went to work, especially at the Ypsilanti bomber plant, Willow Run. I love this class. Verna Mize might be one of my favorite because she helped save Lake Superior from the dumping, from environmental dumping. Some fun facts. It is a Lifetime Achievement Award. So once you have been inducted into the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame, you are inducted for life. It was established in 1983. We now have over 300 inductees into the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame. And Sojourner Truth was it was in the first class. So I'm glad that's... We have many famous members. Rosa Parks, Betty Ford, Governor Granholm, Aretha Franklin, Debbie Stabenow. Our list goes on and on. But today we're actually going to talk about the Civil Rights Movement. And so we know what laws came out of the Civil Rights Movement, we have the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and that was signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson on July 2nd. And the discrimination against women, racial, ethnic, and religious groups was all outlawed at the time. Racial segregation in schools was ended, and unequal voter registration requirements became illegal. Did it always happen? Not. It took a little while for that one to take effect. But the bill was a key outcome of the Civil Rights Movement. and it wouldn't have come out to pass without many members fighting on behalf of others. The other bill that came out of this was the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And this is one that prohibits racial discrimination in voting. So it actually guaranteed the voting rights that were in the 14th and 15th Amendments. The Voting Rights Act also established federal oversight of elections, prohibiting local and state governments from enacting discriminatory voting practices against racial and ethnic minorities. One of the events that led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was the murder of Viola Liuzzo. Has anybody ever heard of her?
No.
Couple. We'll talk about her a little bit later. Because she was murdered on an Alabama highway on March 25th, 1965. And her death spurred the passage of the Voting Rights Act that was actually drafted on March 17th. It did get held up in Congress with several provisions being debated, and it wasn't actually signed until August 6th, 1965. Both Rosa Parks and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. were present. So before we can talk about some of our native-born Michigan women, we gotta start with Rosa Parks. So Rosa, I'm sure that we've all heard of her, right? Yes. So Rosa was on December 1st, 1955, was riding home on a bus, and she refused to give up her seat. She was arrested. She did grow up in Alabama, just outside of Montgomery, and she does recall memories of segregation, of white kids being able to ride the bus to school and black kids expected to walk. She married her husband Raymond Parks in 1931. He was active in the NAACP and was a freedom fighter for the Scottsboro Boys in the 1930s. Both he and Rosa were involved in the voter registration drives for blacks, and in 1943 she actually joined the NAACP herself. So she was a member. She became the Montgomery chapter secretary. And as she was working for Clifford and Virginia Durr, a white couple, they encouraged her in 1955 to attend the Highlander Folk School and Educational Center for Activism. This is where she was taught things like to refuse to give up her seat on the bus. This was all being taught to many people at the time. She'd already passed up on a bus that day on December 1st. She decided she didn't want to anymore. She told the bus driver that I didn't think it was anything I should have to do, and I go ahead and called the police. Anybody actually gone to visit that bus? Yep. You can go. The picture of her sitting there on the bus, that was actually taken later after it was moved to the Henry Ford and had been restored. There you go, fun fact for you. On December 5th, 1955, is when she was tried and convicted of disorderly conduct. She appealed her court case to challenge the legality of racial segregation. She said that she fell victim to sanctions against activism, she did lose her job in Montgomery. Then her and her husband moved to Virginia, briefly, before moving to Detroit in 1957. And this is where she lived out the rest of her life. She remained active in the civil rights. Until then, she worked for Congressman John Coyers before dying in 2005 at age 92. Now, her bus boycott, she was not the first one even to be arrested in Montgomery for refusing to give up her seat. There were 2 other women that had been arrested before her for the same thing, but they were feared that the women would not garner enough white support. So black leaders did not act to make the bus boycotts until Rosa was arrested because she was a well-respected black woman. That's what led to a successful one-day bus boycott on December 5th. A group led by the new upcoming minister, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., organized to continue the bus boycott. Does anybody remember how long that lasted? 381 days. It forced the bus company into financial hardship before the city of Montgomery repealed its law requiring segregation on buses in the wake of the Supreme Court decision. Yeah. But she was not the first one. She wasn't. Now, I talked about Viola Liuzzo earlier with the Voting Rights Act. She was a Michigan mom. She was a white woman. And on March 7th, 1965, she was watching news footage of the civil rights marchers being beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Salem. And she was moved to tears. She told her husband, "Too many people just stand around talking." She decided that she was going to make the 800-mile trip from Detroit to Salem. Her family called her an everyday citizen, not an activist. She was a mother of 5 when she made this trip down there. She did grow up as a poor white in Tennessee, so she saw segregation and the effects of it firsthand as a child. And when she moved to the Detroit area in 1943 with her family, she did become an active member of the NAACP. She was a nursing student at Wayne State in 1962, and she attended meetings organized by the university chaplain Malcolm Boyd. And in 1964, she was further inspired by the Civil Rights March in Detroit. Anybody know who spoke at that? Martin Luther King. It is actually where he perfected the "I Have a Dream" speech. So the first time he said it was not at Washington, D.C. She knew of the dangers of going down to Salem. She had actually asked her friend Sarah Evans, an African-American woman, to help raise her children should anything happen to her. So she knew what was going on when she went down to Salem. And on March 25th, 1965, she was one of 3,200 marchers that were led by Dr. King from Salem to Montgomery, Alabama. Once she arrived in Salem, after making that 800-mile trip by herself, she joined the Transportation Committee and was shuttling civil rights marchers. And on March 25th, she drove protesters from Montgomery to Salem, along with Leroy Morton, a black civil rights activist. While making the return trip along US 80, Gary Thomas Rowe, later revealed as an FBI informant, and 3 other Klansmen pursued her car. The speeds reached about 90 miles an hour as this was all going on, and when the men caught up to her car, they fired a shot, striking her head and killing her instantly. Morton escaped unharmed. He did pretend to play dead to help save him. Unfortunately, that's not the end of her story. More than 750 people attended her funeral, including Dr. King, who said of her, "If physical death is the price someone must pay to save us and our white brothers from eternal death of the spirit, then no sacrifice can be more redemptive." So these pictures, this is the crowd at her funeral, and the other one is a memorial marker that was put on Highway 80 where she was killed in Alabama. The FBI has a part to play. They helped cover Rowe's involvement in her murder, and the all-white, all-male jury acquitted the Klansmen. Yep. But in the effort to definitely cover up the fact that Rowe did nothing to prevent Liuzzo's murder, J. Edgar Hoover told President Johnson that Liuzzo was having sex with black men, was a drug addict, had a husband involved in organized crime. All started this huge smear campaign against her. Her family was isolated, devastated, tormented by the gossip that was surrounding her. And I do know that her family is still very private about it today because of the amount of hate mail and shame they received because of the smear campaign. Some are. she had, I think it was like 3 daughters, so they thankfully have been able to change their names as they got married and don't carry the last name. But it definitely was hard on the family for years as it came out. There is now a park in Detroit named after her as well. One of the people that probably has the world's biggest FBI file from Michigan is Grace Lee Boggs. She was an activist for over 30 or 60 years, and she was not just civil rights, but labor issues, environmental justice. She was very instrumental in grassroots communities and the efforts to rebuild and re-energize Detroit since the 1950s. She was born to Chinese immigrants in Rhode Island in 1915, and she's probably the most educated person on my list today. She went to Barnard College in New York City and then received her PhD from Bryn Mawr College in Philadelphia in 1940. Bryn Mawr College was the first all-women's college to start offering PhDs in the United States to women. She married Jimmy Boggs in 1953, and together they were organizers of the Black Power movement in the 1960s. Why her FBI file is nice and big, because you joined the Black Power movement. She believed in rebuilding industrialized cities, and that she believed that laid in education. An advocate for showing children how to use creativity to solve problems in their communities. She modeling her concept of free schooling. She and Jimmy founded the Detroit Summer in 1992. Detroit summer programs have engaged people of all ages, renovating playgrounds, creating murals, nurturing gardens, and a variety of other projects. In 1995, they started the James and Grace Lee Boggs Center and was founded to develop grassroots activists into leaders. She believes in the next American Revolution. The goal is a higher humanity instead of a higher standard of living, which is dependent upon the empire. Kind of see why she was part of the Black Power movement. She did die just before her 100th birthday. She was 99 years old when she died. This video here, The American Revolutionary, I checked last night and it still is on Netflix. So if you want to see this, it is an amazing documentary. We showed it at the Hall of Fame, was that 2014? So about 5 years ago now. And she was supposed to come, and then she got sick. I was so excited to be able to meet her. But it's an amazing story of how she believes in the grassroots organizations and in equal justice for everybody. Rosa Slade Gregg is probably the one that was in DC the most out of all of our wonderful ladies from Michigan. In the 1960s, she was advising both President Kennedy and President Johnson. She was a powerful force in Michigan, especially in Detroit, after she moved here in 1926. And she started the Detroit Association of Women's Clubs, supporting programs for Black women and girls. During her 4-year tenure as president, the association became the most powerful Black women's group in Detroit. In 1941, she and her husband mortgaged their possessions to put a down payment on the association's first headquarters. Anybody think where they might have done this? All white neighborhood. Yep. Her involvement actually caught the attention of President Franklin Roosevelt, who appointed her to the National Volunteers Participation Committee. She was later appointed to the Status of Women Commission and the National Women's Committee on Civil Rights by President Kennedy. After President Kennedy's assassination, President Johnson called on national civil rights leaders. She was one of 2 women to be included on that call to come in. And she served locally and politically. She believed in, she never saw herself as political. She saw herself as a public servant. So she was doing what she thought was right. Things are moving on me. Hang on. Other way. Rather than that one. Sorry, guys. She also succeeded in having Frederick Douglass's home declared a National Historic Site. She raised $10,000 for the restoration of the house before President Kennedy actually signed it to the register. During all, where is I? I lost my phone. President Kennedy, she was interviewed after attending President Kennedy's conference on civil rights, and she said her hope was that every woman would go back and do what she can for the passage by Congress of the Civil Rights Program. This bill is the most important thing of this year, and if not passed, it's almost fatal for us in civil rights struggle. So on the right over there, she is the woman in white. She is being handed the pen used to sign the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by President Johnson. We actually have that pen. It is pretty cool. Now, our last woman, has anybody ever heard of Daisy Elliott? A couple people have. She is the true Michigan civil rights leader in my mind. In the late 50s, she became an active member of the Michigan Democratic Party. She served as the president of the Michigan Federal Democratic Clubs. Now, anybody know what happened in Michigan in 1961? There's some riots. It's a kind of a bigger state thing. It happened in Lansing. Constitutional Convention. Constitutional Convention, yes. She is a member of the Con 11. Con 11, for those of you that might not know, is a group of 11 women that were elected with 133 men to the Michigan Constitutional Convention. So she is one of 11 women that were representing us at the Constitutional Convention. She was instrumental in the inclusion of the Michigan Civil Rights Commission into our new Constitution. It's the authority to investigate charges of discrimination based on race, religion, color, or national origin, and to enforce anti-discrimination laws. To this day, we are still the only state that has a commission like this in our Constitution. Yes. Well, okay, so 1961, we get a new convention. Great. She's not done. From 1962 to 82, she served in the Michigan House of Representatives. Term limits, what are those, right? But in her first year, she co-authored and introduced the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act, which added sex-based protections for the first time. It passed in 1976. She also proposed an intermediate appellate court, which led to the establishment of the Michigan Court of Appeals. And she also helped form the Legislative Black Caucus in the 70s, was the first woman to chair the Labor Committee. 20 years, pretty good. In her time, she co-sponsored or sponsored over 80 laws that were enacted into legislation. So while most of us I never had even heard of her until I started reading and I started researching once I got to HERStory. And I want to know why we don't never talk about her more. So all of these women have connection to Michigan, and they've done something amazing for our civil rights movement. They had a part, either big or small, that it was something that could be done. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Yes. What do you do in terms of passing on this information to like high schoolers and putting it in the curriculum? Or those, is it the third or fourth graders now? They go to the State House and go to the museum, because that's also.
It's usually about third. I went in third grade, so it could depend. But I'm also from the area, so we would go all the time. The state historian there, the Capitol historian, is an amazing woman, and she does do a pretty good conversation. She gives a pretty good presentation, and she knows about way more women that were early involved also in the Capitol, that only a handful of those women are inducted into our Hall of Fame. So they do get, when they go visit the Capitol, they do get a presentation with Valerie Marvin, their Capitol historian there, We are working on trying to figure some of that out because it would have to be us going into schools, and we don't have the contacts right now. Yes.
Can you briefly talk about the nomination process for perhaps getting more Battle Creek women in the Hall of Fame?
We do need more Battle Creek women. But yes, it's actually a fairly simple process at this moment. It's all on our website. If you go to michiganwomen.org, you can look under, inductees, and then the nomination form is there. It's a 3-part nomination form. And the person can be living or deceased, doesn't matter. And you submit the application, then by March 21st is the cutoff date every year. So if you get it in after March 21st, it's automatically put in for the next year. It goes through a double-blind system for our judging. So once we get them all in, after March 21st, we send out 2 sets, our contemporary and our historical. We send them out to judges. They read them. They rank them. They send them back to us. We send off that. They tally. Our accountant kind of tallies who are the top 20. The top 20 in each category. And then we send them off again to a different set of judges for each category. They rank them, and then it's by point system. And usually there's a pretty clear. And we usually take 2 or 3 in each category. So this year we inducted 5, 2 historical and 3 contemporary.
Are the judges male or female?
Both. Anybody can be a judge. That application is also due on March 21st. So anybody can be a judge. I know I've judged. I thought it was interesting to be able to read stories about wonderful Michigan women that I had never heard of. I'm sure that you felt the same way.
I've been a judge for a couple of years, and I want to say I had about 40 or 50 applicants from all over the state.
So you were the first round.
And yes, I'm in the first round, so it's a lot of reading, but holy moly, you'll learn a ton about what people are doing around the state and in all facets of life, everything from professors to...
We are thinking of ways of trying to make that first round easier for people, like maybe not send you all of them and do it kind of that way, because the point system does normally work its way out. We're still working on that for the year.
Are we one of the only, how many states actually have a Women's Hall of Fame?
I believe I don't know how many states. We are the only state that has a museum 100% dedicated to its women. We are because the National Women's Hall of Fame is in Seneca Falls, New York. But we might be the only state Hall of Fame as well.
Do you know which ones are from Battle Creek? Do you have them categorized?
They are categorized on our website now, so if you go and you look under inductee database, you can look up by locale.
Okay, and Mary Coleman, I'm sure.
I think she is. It's hard to remember. There's over 300, and people call me like every day asking about someone new.
Oh, how many from Battle Creek though?
Oh, over from Battle Creek, it's only maybe less than 10. Less than 10.
At least 10.
Is Laura?
I know Ann Schaefer is one. She was in
that's right.
Battle Creek Business and Professional Women's Club.
Elliott and Kellogg.
Is Laura Haviland on your list?
Oh, goodness. You guys should have pulled up the Battle Creek list. Hang on.
She's not Battle Creek.
Oh, who? Haviland?
When Sojourner Truth was kicked off public transportation, a little lady, 5'0" took her to the headquarters of the Traveling Bureau and had the guy fired. Her name was Laura Haviland, Michigan.
That last name sounds familiar to me.
She should be in every elementary textbook. Not for that alone. She also educated her sons and daughters, of which she had 7, to be the teachers in the New South after the Civil War.
Laura Smith Haviland is.
There's
Someone has
6
to nominate
people
her.
from Battle Creek.
I'll
Ann
put
M. Schaefer, Ella Eaton Kellogg,
Oh, yes.
Lena Francis Cooper, Mary Ann Mayo, Mary Stadlings, Coleman,
Stallings.
Stallings, and Sojourner Truth. Only 6.
Give you some more.
Oh, I have a lot. As my husband knows, I can do a little bit of that.
So MichiganWomen.org, you can get the nomination.
Yep, you can get the nomination for it, and it does have all over 300 inductees on there. Yes.
So this is fabulously important information, and as the lady up in front started the conversation about what are you doing to get it into history books, I would urge your organization to look at creating some written documents to more clearly describe our real history as opposed to the BS that we're getting in our history books today.
Yes.
So, I mean, I don't know what we can do, and she started alluding to it, but there's a big movement afoot to correct, to fix our history books. And I would love to see your organization create a document.
Definitely, we're slim pickings on our staff right now. There's 2 of us. But it's definitely, that's one of those things that we do want to try to do is get our stories out more, do more writings and such, but it's just, when there's 2 of us.
People, well, where's my full-time equivalent helping you, right?
Yeah. That's why you're here.
Yes.
He asked an important question because I think sometimes we do the things wrong by having little boxes and categories. Because as I was listening to you right away, I'm editing, and I would have put down test cases. And then I would have had your important lady that you mentioned as being an important test case. But then I would also define test case. It was when people who lived the American spirit wanted equality, justice, women on board, and the whole 9 yards, and they lived their lives in a community that way. And having said that, think Trayvon Martin, that was a test case. They don't take the test case until they think they can win them. Well, they didn't win that. Sojourner had 2 test cases underneath her name, Isabel Baumfried, before anybody knew her as Sojourner Truth. Now, I have told this story for 20 years, and thank goodness for Battle Creek, because they let me speak about it 7 times. Having said that, I don't know why in the last 20 years it got off track and the story is still not told when we have a women's history area. And I will say one more final thing. A lady came to me because she wanted to know a little bit more about Sojourner Truth. And she directed me to the archives right here in Battle Creek. And I struggled for a long time because I did a lot of research. The information is here. Having said that, when I uncovered in the first 5 months her real story, I found that I really believed that the Underground Railroad was part and parcel of the Underground Railroad, meaning the rail system, which it was. And for over 15 years, I couldn't prove it because most of my research was really on Isabel. When I went to the archives that the lady directed me to, true story, I opened up the book, maps of the Underground Railroad.
Wow.
Absolutely. Not only did they give the maps, they gave the name of the 3 most important terminals and so forth. And so my husband has been very patiently waiting every year when I say, when are they going to say that the Underground Railroad really was a segment of the railroad?
I think it depends on the area. I think the more you got north, the more you got north, it did connect more with railroads, especially as you're trying to get into Canada where they are free. But the south didn't quite, because there wasn't as many railroads down there.
Reminisces every February thanks to Carter Woodson. Nobody ever mentions that. And so you can imagine my finding the maps and the information is really out there for people who do like to do research. It's right there.
Yeah. Any other questions?
What's your story in terms of, I mean,
Okay.
there's 2 of you at the Michigan.
I started as a high school student needing my NHS hours, and I wanted to go into history. So I started my senior year of high school volunteering, doing a lot of administrative work in 2011. I went to Alma College, where I got my bachelor's in history and my minor in theater and religious studies. Turned around and moved 9.5 hours away from home. I went to Villanova University, go Wildcats. I was there when they won the championship in 2016. So yes, big basketball fan over here now. I graduated in 2017 with my master's in public history. In that time frame, I had volunteered in 2014 as an intern for a summer, getting to do a lot of research on the 2014 class of Hall of Fame inductees. It just happened to be when I was graduating in May of 2017 that we were moving to the Meridian Mall. Part of the move required us to actually hire guest assistants to help run the museum in the later hours and on weekends when we had to be open with the mall hours. I had met Caitlin, our former executive director, through connections, and she goes, "Are you serious about wanting to work here?" Said yes. Said, "Okay, send me your cover letter," because she had my resume. She was wonderful looking at it, "and you'll be on the top of my list." I graduated on May 20th. I started on May 24th. So I have been with HERStory since I graduated in May of 2017. I am now the lead guest assistant. Caitlin has gone on to a better job, and we are still looking for a current executive director at the moment.
What is modern history?
Public history?
Public.
So it's basically this. Public history is a very broad span of history. It's the idea of different ways of bringing history to the public. If you are a writer that does all of your research and sends public history that way, museums are public history. If you are a consultant on a movie that's a historical movie, that's public history. It's how history is viewed by the public and how you bring that to them. So there's so many different ways of being a public historian.